Hi everyone, my name is Jana and I run public events here at the gallery, and I'm very, very excited to introduce tonight's event. This is part of kind of an ongoing conversation I think that we've been having at the gallery with the Bertrand Russell Foundation and various other affiliations of the Bertrand Russell Foundation, and really just looking at the questions around workers' control. And this started, I think, a long time ago to some extent, but more actively in our last exhibition, which was on art and politics in the former Yugoslavia, where we were looking at relationships between Nottingham and the former Yugoslavia, and even potential contemporary kind of solidarities that could be formed between different kinds of workers groups and people interested in workers' control. So tonight this is a kind of follow-up event where we're looking at the history of the Lucas Aerospace Plan, which is a mouthful, but and this is a really, really exciting history which I'm sure many of you know about because you're here and engaged, but maybe some people don't. But we're going to hear quite a bit more about it tonight. I'll just say a little bit that really what is so incredible about it, thinking about it today, is and also not uncommon with some of the conversations we had in the show we had on former Yugoslavia, where we had a group of people here who are from Bosnia and Herzegovina, who had recently basically taken over an unoccupied factory and put it under worker self-control, and that's become a very important kind of space for internationally and also within the region, thinking through all kinds of responses to privatization, neoliberalization. So I think looking back is also about looking forward and looking into what's happening now. So hopefully in our discussion today we'll be able to talk about the relationship between this incredible story of workers in the face of a factory closure actually taking control not only of the means of production but also of the actual products of production, which I think is part of the story of inspiration. So we have three people who are going to respond in various ways to this tonight. Phil Asquith was a chartered engineer and senior rep of TAS and the chairman of the Burnley Joint Shop Stewards Committee. He was closely involved in the Lucas Plan in all of its stages and has spoken on the plan and arms conversion at countless meetings and conferences in the UK, the US, Europe, and Scandinavia. After leaving Lucas, Phil worked on the development of socially useful projects with Sheffield City Council and worked then in economic development for the East Midlands Development Agency, and has more recently developed a whole other career which he'll tell you about tonight. So he's going to speak at the end. And also we have with us Tony Simpson, who is from the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation. And the foundation, if people don't know, was founded in 1963 to forward Russell's work for peace, human rights, and social justice. And we're pretty fortunate to have it in Nottingham. That was when I kind of started working here. That was kind of a highlight for me to some extent, that this was in the city. And this is sort of, we're working in collaboration with them on a few things. And one of those things is sort of giving some public exposure to the work that Tom, who will also speak tonight, is doing around the archiving and making public of Ken Coates' archive, who was a very important kind of local miner, educator, trade unionist, and advocate of workers' control. So that event is taking place on May the 19th. So I'm hoping that people who are here tonight might be interested in following that up with a discussion then with Tom, who you'll hear from. So we have first Tony, then the film. Oh yes, we're seeing a film on the Lucas Plan. Then we'll hear from Tom and Phil. So thanks so much for coming, and over to you, Tom.
Thank you. Can we use them?
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming, as Jana says. Upstairs there's a canoe. Still working. Good. All the other microphones are on, so just pick them over.
Okay.
You can do that.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Hello? Yep, that sounds good. Right, we're in business. Technical hitch. Yes. Upstairs there's a canoe. You've probably seen the canoe, made of magnesium. made from magnesium that comes from water, that comes from the Dead Sea. Simon Starling acknowledges the ingenuity of the aero engineer, Frank Kirk, I think his name is, who extracted this magnesium in order to make lightweight frames for bicycles. And I see a parallel between what that aero engineer did and what Mike Cooley, Phil Asquith and their colleagues did at Lucas Aerospace, in the ingenuity that they employed in terms of looking for alternatives to making a range of products at Lucas Industries, from kidney machines, kidney dialysis machines, heart pacemakers, but also military equipment as well. And the context was very much that of increasing unemployment in the early 1970s. The trigger, interestingly, for much of the work was the bankruptcy of Rolls-Royce in 1971. Obviously, this had a regional impact in the East Midlands with Rolls-Royce at Derby. Lucas, as I understand it, was a major supplier of Rolls-Royce. And so with that company's future in question, there was a knock-on effect amongst the suppliers. And Phil will tell us more about this, but I understand that the combined committee that emerged across the 17 plants that Lucas had in the United Kingdom were very much working in a way of trying to get ahead of the argument, so that when the question of closure of a plant or of widespread redundancies was posed, that there was something to offer as an alternative. Now, that became very much a political as well as a trade union struggle, and the problems were quite formidable. But nevertheless, that example from the mid-70s continues to resonate. I mean, it's 40 years in June since the publication of the Lucas Alternative Plan. You'll see a slide of it somewhere along the way. And where we came in, that is the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation, was that first of all, there was the Institute for Workers' Control. In a way, the IWC almost predated the Russell Foundation. You know, the initial work on workers' control was done by Ken Coates locally with others. Tony Topham was a close collaborator. It was people working in adult education who were working on day release schemes with trade unionists from companies like Rolls-Royce, but also from the coal industry and the steel industry. And the first workers' control conferences were held in Nottingham in the early 60s. This is quite an interesting one in particular, when Bertrand Russell joins the team of The Week. The Week was a journal that Ken used to edit from his address in Dunkirk, 19 Greenfield Street, next to the university. And the address on there is in Park Avenue, next to the park, you know, near Castle Boulevard, which was where Peter Price lived, I think. And that was where much of the duplicating and other kinds of production of The Week was done. And I'm jumping a little bit, but the point was that Russell was alert to what was going on, I think, in Nottingham, partly because of the internationalist approach of The Week. Vietnam was a big issue, a dominant issue. The Vietnam Solidarity Campaign emerged in the mid-60s. Ken was very active in that. Russell invited Ken to work with him at the Bertrand Russell Peace Foundation, which was then based in London. Ken hesitated, but eventually accepted the invitation. And it was only a few years later 67, I think it was, that actually the foundation moved its offices from London to Nottingham. Meanwhile, the work on workers' control was continuing, and that was one of the reasons I think Ken was reluctant to allocate or to commit himself to the Russell Foundation, was because workers' control was very much a priority for him. We'll have more of a discussion about that on the 19th of May, I think, when we look at Ken's political archive. But I mention it now because that's the context in which the Russell Foundation came to be in Nottingham. I mean, we've been here from Gamble Street, from Goldsmith Street to Gamble Street, Ilkeston Road to Bulwell Lane for 50 years. But actually, not many people tend to know that we're there. You might have heard of the Russell Press, which is our commercial printing company, which is also at our premises in Baysford. But part of the work of the Russell Foundation was a publishing programme, and that continues. So here's a little plug. Architect B was, you might have seen it or come across it since it was first published in 1980, from an address in Slough, which is Mike Cooley's home address. And it has the subtitle, The Human Price of Technology. Tom will go in a little more into what the significance of this rather odd title is, Architect B. But it's one that really caught the imagination of the Institute for Workers' Control. And the IWC sponsored a number of conferences which featured the work of the Lucas Aerospace Combined Committee. Phil was telling me earlier about a debate between Arthur Scargill and, was it Ken? And Mike Cooley, yeah, on workers' control, which was probably quite a sparky debate, I should think. I first came across Mike Cooley myself at Northern College, which is at Barnsley, or near Barnsley. And this was in the early 1980s, shortly after Mrs. Thatcher's arrival. And it was the Ice Age, you know, we were into a very difficult time. And Mike emphasised the need for creative energy and ingenuity in response to that situation. There's something of the poet about Mike Cooley, it has to be said. I mean, he's an unusual engineer, and he lifted the conference. Once heard, you know, you never forget. The kind of emphasis he had was on tacit knowledge, which is that people at work actually have a much better idea of what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they might do it better than anybody who seeks to so-called manage them. And this is the creative energy, even the revolutionary energy, that he might unleash, or that might be unleashed more generally, if that idea is grasped more widely. Is there any mileage in it today? We had a meeting at the TUC last week with Francis O'Grady, the General Secretary. Francis came to Nottingham, as you'll remember, some of you, to give Ken Coates' memorial lecture last year. And on the way back to the station afterwards, she agreed to write an introduction to Architect B, because she was inspired by her father's experience at the Cowley car plant in Oxford. He was on the production line there. And he and his colleagues at Cowley devised what was the alternative plan for British Leyland in the late 1970s. And this envisaged the use of hybrid engines for low emissions, which would be both environmentally beneficial and also would preserve the work of the company going forward. And Francis pointed out that actually it was 30 years later that the first Mini rolled off the line at Cowley, which was an electric car under the auspices of BMW. So, in a way, Francis kind of made a challenge. At the end of the discussion, she said, you know, this is all I can feel the energy in the room, but a convener said to me, show me an alternative plan that works. And we want to take up that challenge. It's not just about an alternative plan, it's about an alternative idea and an alternative approach. But there is a rising tide of interest. And in addition to our book, there's a conference in the offing in Birmingham later in the year, which will mark the 40th anniversary of the Lucas Aerospace Plan. It's being organised by a group called Breaking the Frame, which invokes a kind of a Luddite tradition. Luddites are rather misunderstood in my view. They were very selective about what they broke. You know, it was an informed approach to preserving livelihoods. So it's an appropriate legacy to invoke. You'll see in the film that we're about to watch the road rail vehicle. It can go on the road and it can go on the rails. It can go up steep hills. That's the main difference, I believe, with trains, which can't do a steep gradient. And it occurs to me that as this is part of the grand tour of locations in the East Midlands, including Chatsworth, Welbeck and here at Nottingham Contemporary, that actually the road rail vehicle is the grand tourer. And on that note, I'll let you watch the film. Thank you very much.
Lucas Aerospace Limited has factories on 17 sites all over Britain. In 1974, the company-wide shop stewards committee, known as the Combine Committee, were worried about continuing redundancies. Two of the shop stewards at the Willesden plant are Ernie Scarborough and Mike Cooley. Mike Cooley describes the local employment situation.
In the area where we work, there was a general decline in the engineering industry as a whole. All around us, engineering companies were closing down and were being replaced in the main by companies who were involved in distribution, that kind of semi-skilled sort of work. Now, you see here the beginning of the real industrial decline. That factory, which used to produce engineering components, now for sale. This next one along here was part of the GKN group, again producing mechanical engineering components. That's for sale and complete demolition. And this was typical of the decline in this area, so that the workers at Lucas down the road could see all these factories closing and realize that they had to develop an entirely new tactic for fighting these redundancies because they'd been clearly unsuccessful in those other factories down the road.
We took the view that it was no good just waiting until the problems were on us and then whining to the government or to the TUC or whoever that we want the right to work. We thought that we have a very highly skilled, very competent workforce, and we have the intelligence amongst ourselves to devise or endeavour to solve the problems for ourselves.
In November 1974, representatives of the Combine Committee went to see Tony Benn, then Secretary of State for Industry, who was at the time considering the nationalisation of the aircraft industry.
They expressed their great anxiety about the future of their company and their prospects for employment. And I said to them, well, look, why don't you go away, and as I suggested to them, and do a corporate strategy for your own company based on your own knowledge of the company, of the equipment, of the skills, of the market available, and they did. And it's one of the most remarkable exercises that's ever occurred in British industrial history.
The Inter-Union Combine Committee spent a year putting the plan together. When it was made public, it received wide coverage from a variety of sources, including a prominent engineering management magazine. The Financial Times saw it as a unique initiative in industrial relations. So how did the plan come about, and what happened to it? The plant which took up the idea of the plan most readily was Burnley, one of the largest Lucas Aerospace factories, employing 3,000 people out of a total workforce of 14,000. Since the decline of the cotton industry, other industries like aerospace have moved into Burnley, but unemployment is still a major problem. The Lucas Aerospace plant here, relying like other aerospace sites on mainly aircraft and defense contracts, was hard hit by the Rolls-Royce crash of 1970. In July 1976, we filmed local shop stewards from both blue and white-collar unions who'd worked on the plan to see why they had adopted this new approach.
In 1970, when we had the redundancy situation, so our manager at that time had us in just prior to that, and was talking about the business not looking so clever today, and but never mind, lads, we've got all these lads over in research who are looking at new products. So when this business cropped up, the redundancy situation cropped up, then we thought, well, I did anyway. I thought, well, we're all right. The company's there. They've got these alternative products. Oh, we're laughing, not to bother. We haven't got all our eggs in one basket, such as we've always been thinking. It isn't always Rolls-Royce we're relying upon and think people like that. The company are there. They have that building over there, which they can do all these clever things. So we're all right, lads. However, it didn't transpire that way. And this we realised. And of course, once we realised that, then we said, well, we've got to do something now. The company are not going to do anything, and we've got to protect ourselves.
What do you do when your job declines and goes? If it's not there and the manufacturing's not needed, what do? You go on the dole. Now, this is a horrible prospect for any worker to be pitched onto the dole, and it's very degrading.
You can strike, you can occupy the factory, you can live there, but if there's no demand for the article that you've been making, if the demand's suddenly gone, then you can sit in there till the cows come home. So with that recent bitter experience in mind, I think it's probably stimulated us in Burnley more than at the other factories, for example, to really sit down and grapple with the problems of what can people be usefully employed upon once the current product line disappears.
It was the shop stewards at each site who took a leading role in putting the plan together, feeding ideas and information to the Central Combine Committee. But initially they found it difficult to involve the workforce.
Now, I remember when I sent round a questionnaire to draw on the knowledge of some of my members in compiling the technical side of the corporate plan, machine tools, plant. I sent a circular around that said, we want answers to these questions, and really, your jobs depend on it. And I got not one reply from it.
It was primarily a committee of 6 in Burnley that did the work, did the ask the questions, get the answers from wherever you can get them. And that's really the big trick, is to get the answers to questions, because sometimes management are a little bit reluctant to divulge some information. You can't force it out of them. And this is the way it was done there was about 6 of us, I think, involved in Burnley.
It was new to us, and with nothing to look up on and read about. If other companies were thinking of doing anything similar, they could come and ask, how do you go about it? We've done it from grassroots, and we make a success of it.
To win support from the workforce for their ideas, the Combine Committee organised a series of teach-ins on the corporate plan. The first of these was at Padiham Town Hall near the Burnley plant.
Could we ask you to, for order now, ladies and gentlemen, please, brothers and sisters, just to start the ball rolling, a few months ago we asked the Burnley workforce of Lucas Aerospace to endorse the corporate plan. Now, obviously, to a lot of the people within the workforce, we put a lot of blind faith into the shop stewards and the union representatives, in as much as it's a very technical subject, and obviously it's something you can't explain at a mass meeting. So first and foremost, we've got to explain...
At the meeting, shop stewards outlined the background to the plan, and Mike Cooley described some of the proposed products and showed a film of a prototype road rail vehicle, one of the pieces of hardware that had already been built and tested outside the company.
The aim of the road rail vehicle was to provide a transport system which would be cheap and effective and would meet the needs that we've got in Britain to overcome congested cities and at the same time make full use of the national railway network that we've got. Now, to achieve both of those things, we had to have a vehicle that could run through a city as a coach and then by some means go straight onto the national railway network. We did that by designing a simple guide mechanism so that you could use the rubber tires both when you're going along the road and on the rails.
Besides the road rail vehicle, there were 150 other proposals in the fields of energy, medicine, transport and oceanics, with the emphasis being on products that met social needs, such as plans for heat pump units for council houses and an increased output of the company's kidney machines. But the plan didn't just outline proposed alternative products, it also called for new methods of production. At the teach-in, Mike Cooley illustrated some of the effects of current types of production by referring to an agreement between the Amalgamated Union of Engineering Workers and British Leyland on rest periods.
Not 1.6 or 1.7, it's computer precise, 1.62. And the toilets, incidentally, have been strategically placed close to the production line. Recovery from fatigue, 1.3 minutes. Sitting down after standing too long, 65 seconds. For monotony, 32 seconds. Now we say that form of technology is unacceptable. And if the only way to build cars and products of that kind is to use that kind of technology, then we should be questioning whether we should be making those kind of products in that sort of way at all.
So what the plan was calling for was socially useful and needed products produced in a socially desirable way. But this is an approach which to some extent challenges existing concepts of profit.
What percentage of the diversification is into a commercial competitive field as opposed to a social or socially acceptable health-wise field?
Whether a product is regarded as profitable or not really depends on the value that the government and society puts on it. For example, it is regarded as profitable to make Harriers, but not profitable to make kidney machines. Now, it's the same customer, the government. So it just depends on what price the government's put on it. And does one expect a hospital or a school to be profitable?
I think for the ordinary workers, I think you appeal to the ordinary workers, not those who's been involved in the social committees, need a gap to be bridged. Education, to make them realize that what you've been emphasizing, to come away from this jumping for the carrot and the money, but to look forward something more human value, more social value, more reliable and secure. How would we overcome this to come to our level? At your level, brought down to our shop floor level. It needs a lot of education.
But these questions only brought out a few of the ideas the teach-in obviously raised in the minds of the 300 people present. To illustrate the more complex response of the different members of the workforce, we filmed a subsequent discussion in the local pub between a shop floor worker and one of the research staff and two middle management planning engineers.
Put it this way, if you work for a company for 8-10 years like I worked for Lucas for 10 years, and they're coming up, they're going to say, well, that's your lot, throw it up against the wall. You could be on the door now. I'm okay. I'm young, but, I'm calling myself young, I'm 30. But put yourself at some day at 58.
Don't look at them.
I'm not looking at nobody, but just put yourself in a safe position.
What chance did you get this job?
He's on the door from 58. There we go.
Well, why can't we set something up for this? Why can't they put the money in and let's...
In Monty, we've had suggestion schemes now, and it's plastered all over the walls in Lucas. Suggestions. He can put the suggestion in now, and it'll take him 6 or 8 months before he even gets a reply.
Most of us, we sort of work on the shop floor, and it's not the sort of the technical things that you can involve in. And like tonight was explained to us all the different aspects that we could get into, into oceanics and, all those sorts of different things in medicine,
Yeah.
Which I didn't even know Lucas made a kidney machine. I'm young, I have a family, 2 kids. I'm looking a lot further. I'm looking in, with Lucas, I'm looking for years to come. What's going to happen then?
Nobody actually mentioned it tonight. It was sort of, perhaps it deliberately remained sort of, kept it at a low profile. It's basically a wholly different philosophy. In the capitalist system, it's a question of who manages, and this is a challenge to that.
But when you start coming up, you say, okay, let's push the kidney machines. Let's make the kidney machine a big thing. Let's get them all out.
Yeah, but they've got to satisfy the shareholders.
Well,
If you've got money invested in the company, you want a return for your money. You don't want to be subsidising something that's sold.
The only collecting the 5 notes the shareholders are. They close on the shop floor and going, that's where the company is.
Well, they have to, because that's where they get the capital from to finance it.
To elevate, no.
But then again,
I agree with what you said.
In May 1976, the companies stated that they did not feel able to accept the proposals outlined in the plan. Although they offered to hold local consultative meetings on new products at site level, they would not meet the Combined Shop Stewards Committee to discuss the overall plan, claiming that the committee were not part of the established negotiating structure and were not a representative body. They issued a statement which in essence suggested that the products outlined in the plan were unsuited to the Lucas product range and were not likely to be profitable. But the Combine Committee does not accept that all the products are likely to be unprofitable.
The profitable ones include the heat pump, which is like a refrigerator working in reverse and conserves a lot of energy. The company is still saying that that is not a viable product, but we have intercepted one of the company's own market surveys, which shows that the market for these in the domestic sector by 1985 will be 255 million, and in the commercial sector by 897 million pounds. Now added together, that's 1,000 million pounds market. So nobody can seriously suggest that that's not viable.
Obviously, not all the products proposed for the various sites have as much market potential as this, but some clearly will. So why does Cooley think the company rejected their corporate plan?
So 2 reasons. Firstly, we are insisting that for every potentially profitable one that we give them, that they also take on board a socially useful one. So we're doing that within a collective bargaining framework. And they don't want to take on the socially useful ones. The second thing is they're very concerned at the shift in power. They actively dislike the idea that their workers will begin to decide what products they should be making and how they should be making them.
We would have liked the company to answer some of these points, but they repeatedly refused to take part in this program. The Transport and General Workers Union was one of the unions who supported the plan. In a pamphlet on the implication of defence cuts, it encouraged the shop stewards in other firms to take up the idea. The TUC, although sympathetic to the plan, were apparently unable to intervene directly and declined to take part in this program. In general, the response of the unions to the plan was less than enthusiastic.
The kind of things we're doing are outside the normal trade union traditions. The Combine Committee itself is not really accepted into the trade union structure in any official sense. In our view, it's absolutely essential to have it to deal with multinational companies, but the trade union movement as at present constituted doesn't cater for this kind of organization.
Ernest Scarborough believes that the present trade union structure fails to deal with multi-plant companies because of its fragmentation by trade and by location.
You talk about the major unions like the AUEW or the Transport and General Workers Unions. They're still based on, basically on the divisions whereby the country is split up into a number of separate groups, and consequently they're not capable of dealing with anything on a national scale or a multi-union scale.
I think also that the bureaucracy in the trade union movement is fearful or maybe even hostile to this high level of rank and file activism.
In February 1977, following rumours that 1,100 workers were to be made redundant, the Combine Committee sought a meeting at Westminster. More than 70 shop stewards arrived to explain the plan to the 11 MPs who attended the meeting. Later, these MPs invited Lucas executives to discuss the future of the company with them. The MPs most closely concerned with arranging the meetings and what happened subsequently were two backbench Labour MPs, Jeff Rooker and Audrey Wise. They were in favour of the plan and sought to gain support for it in Parliament and from government. What happened?
Well, first of all, there's a major problem in that you can't ask parliamentary questions about an individual company of this nature, particularly as far as this corporate plan is concerned. The reason for that is there's no ministerial responsibility for the running of Lucas's, and ministers will only answer questions for matters on which they're responsible. And it brings out the divide between Whitehall and Westminster. In other words, the executive branch of government that carries out decisions and takes action is the government and Whitehall. It is not Parliament. And there's a great myth, of course, as far as the public are concerned, and in some ways, as far as the shop stewards of Lucas Aerospace are concerned, that Parliament runs the country and we as backbenchers could make these decisions and put pressure to change the course of their company. This is not so. We can raise the matter in debate when we have a debate on defence, for instance, or a debate on industrial strategy, industrial
done
policy.
That. We've actually had amendments down which specifically mention the Lucas corporate plan.
But you have to then fall back to it is a fallback position, to actually write to ministers. And these take sometimes a long time to get replies. The average minister replying to a member of Parliament will take 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes longer, to reply to a letter. So I wrote to ministers of the Department of Industry and got very little change at all.
We know that the government has weapons at its disposal in relation to Lucas if it wants to use them. For example, Lucas, like all private companies, gets certain concessions, certain allowances. There is money which could be made conditional on cooperation. The government could use its power as a purchaser. Lucas, the biggest customer of Lucas is the Ministry of Defence.
The shop stewards were obviously disappointed that the government weren't prepared to help them. This surprised them, since the plan seemed to fit in with the Labour government's industrial strategy, and in particular with its policies on planning agreements and job creation. We invited the present Secretary of State for Industry to take part in the programme, but he also declined.
They don't want to do anything about it because, in my view, it would represent a shift in power in industry. All the government's job creation schemes, such as cleaning up beaches, counting gravestones, lampposts and so on, all of these are costing the nation-state £680 million a year, but they do not change any of the power relationships. Whereas if our scheme were to be accepted, it would mean that workers would have the right to say what products they thought society needed. And they would be looking at products which were socially useful, not just profitable. And I don't think the government is willing to accept that kind of commitment.
Tony Benn, now Secretary of State for Energy, sees the Lucas initiative in a longer-term perspective.
It is not possible to change decisions in a complicated society in 24 hours or 1 year. And after all, Robert the Bruce, if at first you don't succeed, try again. You've got all sorts of setbacks. And I have them myself. I mean, I'm trying to engage in campaigns all the time as a minister. You mustn't think that position alters because you're a cabinet minister. You're trying to persuade your officials, you're trying to persuade the House of Commons, you're trying to persuade the electors, you're trying to persuade cabinet colleagues, trying to persuade groups of people, and I'm continually faced with setbacks. And I just refuse to believe that effort of this quality and character is wasted. It may take a bit of time. After all, there are many things advocated in the middle of the 17th century by the levellers that have never been implemented, you know, in Britain. So you've got to take a proper perspective.
The long-term perspective may be fine for a politician like Tony Benn, but it doesn't deal with the immediate problems of plant closures and loss of jobs, which the alternative corporate plan was designed to avoid. Already the workforce has been cut from 18,000 in 1970 to 12,000 in 1977. Jobs continue to be lost on the various sites by natural wastage, that's to say positions not being filled when people leave. Out outright redundancies were also expected, because although Lucas Industries is highly profitable, its aerospace division has seen a profit of £4.4 million in 1976 turn into a loss in 1977. The Combine Committee feared that the company intended to run down the aerospace division. In March 1978, an announcement was made which seemed to confirm these fears. 5 plants were scheduled to close, and 2,000 jobs were affected. It's perhaps a fitting conclusion to the story of the campaign so far that the response of the workers is now, in some respects, as negative as the management, the unions, and the governments has been, except that the shop stewards see it as a sad last option.
We have now made a decision which we're carrying out to prevent the movement of any equipment or know-how from one plant to another, so the company is being immobilized internally. But in some ways, this is a sign of defeat, because we've had to go back to the old traditional trade union industrial sanction type situation. But if we're left with no other option, then we intend doing that.
Just while he's getting his papers together, we're very lucky to be joined by Phil Asquith, and we're very lucky to have him with us tonight talking about his direct experiences in the Lucas Combine and in the creation of that plan. So please welcome Phil.
Well, thank you very much and good evening. Can you hear me? Okay. My wife's just said to me that I look exactly the same as I did in the film, so I must have looked 67 years of age then. She's very supportive, and thank you very much. The 28th of July this year will see the 40th anniversary of the film which you've just seen there. I indeed have a poster which we drew up in the drawing office, which we had up in the plant, advertising the launch of the plan in Burnley to our workforce, and that was what you've just seen there. Last year, when I was approached by Steve Sprung, who's making a 2-hour documentary on the Lucas plan and relating it to the issues of today, when I spoke to Steve last year, I was completely unaware that 2016 would actually be the 40th anniversary of the launch of the plan, because my wife and I developed a completely unrelated career, which may go into later. The fact that Steve was, as an experienced documentary maker, was wanting to do this 40 years later was startling to me. And I was even touched as well when he pointed out that a number of people in London from different interested organisations were actually making plans for events and a big conference this year to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the plan. In fact, I'm going to one of the planning meetings on Saturday. So I was quite astonished and touched by the fact that this is still going on. And it's the first time I've spoken on this subject for years, actually. Steve pointed out that the issues raised in the plan, particularly those around the use and abuse of technology and the structure of work, are perhaps more relevant today than they were in 1975, although they were big issues then. So the fact that I'm here tonight, all this has come as quite a surprise. I've been asked just to say a little about the plan, but also to focus on a couple of issues. One briefly on socially useful production, but then on work organisation and how work was changing in the 70s, because that really then fits under the umbrella of Architect RB. And like the best quiz programmes, I've got 8 minutes in which to cover that. The plan focused on 3 objectives. The first was, naturally, to save jobs, as you've seen in the film. The second was to save jobs by the production of socially useful products. And the third, which perhaps is less well-known aspect of it, although Mike spoke about it there, was about job redesign and the way that technology was being used to fragment and de-skill the design and the production process. 6 minutes now. But what is a socially useful product? During the discussions in the Combine and on the sites in the early 70s on what we might make if weapons were cancelled, it wasn't a great leap of imagination to work out that, well, if we don't make things that kill people, perhaps we ought to start making things that would actually enhance people's lives rather than detract from them, or even take their lives altogether, which is what many of our products did. The examples of some of the socially useful products have been shown on there. The hybrid power pack. I have in this pile in front of me the document that you saw on the screen, which was Lucas Aerospace Director's reply to the corporate plan. And that, essentially, you can look at it later if you wish, essentially say that there was no future for hybrid vehicle technology. It's there in black and white if anyone wants to see it. The other example of socially useful products was cheap heating systems. Those of you who are as ancient as I am will remember, and it's still the case, that thousands of pensioners, old people, die each year because they cannot afford to run the heating or eating. So our society had a contradiction where you have thousands of engineers on the dole whose skills weren't being utilised when they could be used to meet the unmet needs of society. As Mike said, by heat pumps, which are in the plan, by wind generators. We made aircraft generators at Lucas. It was one small step to turn those into wind generators, and by solar technology, again, dismissed in this document as having no future. And perhaps the most obvious socially useful product is that of medical equipment. Mike made a very, very good point in the film, which I found is the point that resonates the most with people, and that is the political definition of profit. Lucas said to us that aircraft components were profitable, that kidney machines weren't profitable for them, both paid for by the government, both financed by you and me, the taxpayer. A purely political definition of profit that we've been challenging ever since. We actually did a definition in some related work, a definition of a socially useful product, that it must not waste energy and raw materials, neither in its manufacture nor its use. The product must be capable of being produced in a labour-intensive manner so as not to give rise to structural unemployment, and the product must lend itself to organisational forms within production that are non-alienating and without authoritarian giving of orders. Instead, the work should be organised so as to link practical and theoretical tasks and allow for human creativity and enthusiasm. Now, the last point was a direct challenge to the principle of scientific management. The father of that particular concept was one Frederick Winslow Taylor, the inventor of Taylorism. And Taylorism is about attempting to reduce the worker to a blind, unthinking appendage to the machine or to the process. To quote Taylor, this was going back as far as 1945, I think it was, He says the workman, it's a man notice, the workman is told minutely what he is to do and how he is to do it, and any improvement he makes upon the orders given to him is fatal to success. So this is what started coming through the theory of scientific management into the production processes in the 50s, 60s, and definitely in the 70s. This was supplemented by a man called Robert Boguslaw in the 60s in a publication called The New Utopians, which gave a very revealing view of the designers of the production design systems that were being foisted upon workers in the industry. And this is a little long, but it's worth it. He said, what we need is an inventory of the manner in which human behaviour can be controlled and a description of some of the instruments which will help us achieve that control. If this provides us with sufficient handles on human materials so that we can think of them as metal parts, electrical power or chemical reactions, then we have succeeded in placing human material on the same footing as any other material and can begin to proceed with our problem of systems design. He goes on to say, it gets better or worse depending on your take, there are, however, many disadvantages in the use of these human operating units. They are somewhat fragile, subject to fatigue, obsolescence, disease, and even death. They are frequently stupid, unreliable, and limited in memory capacity. I qualify on the latter. But beyond all this, they sometimes seek to design their own circuitry. This in a material, we're talking about human beings, is unforgivable, and any system utilising them must devise appropriate safeguards. So according to Boguslaw, that is what's most precious in human beings. The ability to think and design their own circuitry is something that should be suppressed. We thought that was a joke until one of our colleagues checked it out, the actual publication. So this thinking was applied throughout the 60s and 70s and so on, and it gave rise to what we referred to as structural unemployment. That is, jobs that were designed out of the production and design process, so that our unemployment was no longer cyclical as trade cycles would wax and wane. There was a gradual rise of structural unemployment, jobs that would go away and never come back. And that impacted itself on us in Lucas, where they were trying to replace human intelligence by machine intelligence. This, of course, was an anathema to skilled workers, and then white-collar workers found that they were having their own medicine applied to them, in that they used to design systems to speed up people on the production lines, and they were having the same treatment applied to white-collar professions, some of which explain the growth of white-collar trade unionism in the 70s. In fact, there's a cause célèbre at the Marston Green factory of Lucas Aerospace, where a new computing system was bought, computer-aided design stroke manufacture. And like all computers, it was housed in a temperature and humidity controlled environment, whilst the draftsman actually had to work in drafts in this cold, damp building, and they threatened to strike for parity with the machines. Absolutely amazing. They won eventually. Time's moving on, so I'll move on too. So to counter this trend, part of the plan, and I do have the original plan with me, there aren't many in circulation now. It's so old it makes the Dead Sea Scrolls look as though they're hot off the press. It's a tattered, torn, duplicated thing, but if anybody wants to have a look, it's around here somewhere. We propose job redesign, an employee development programme, more traditional apprenticeships, because apprentices are actually being sacked at the end of their time, employ more women in technologies and extending the skills and abilities of the workforce, particularly in skills transference from the older workers to the younger workers. Other things were going on related to this in other parts of the world. A couple of examples. In 1972, the Union of Automotive Workers at Chrysler demanded talks on how to humanise assembly jobs and make that part of the collective bargaining process. And as early as 1970, the same union demanded talks on the elimination of pollution from the car exhaust that they built and the plant's pollution, again, in the collective bargaining process. And I think that was an early example of people working in industry recognising their dual role, not just as producers, but as consumers of the products which their colleagues manufactured. Just to move to summarise, if I can find the right bit of paper, you saw towards the end of that programme the absolute hostility, well, words fail me, but you saw the reaction of the establishment, and Mike Cooley put his finger on it, is what they were reacting against was the combined committee structure working, in their eyes, outside of the official structure. And the official structure, we looked as part of the research in the 70s, how many struggles the Confederation of Shipbuilding and Engineering Unions had won on plant closures within the preceding 20 years, and the answer was none. So one of the real issues around the hostility there was here was an effective body that could take industrial action overnight when they wanted to, but they were not prepared to work to the lowest common denominator imposed by the Byzantine structure of the British trade union movement. So, in summary, I'm following on from that, the corporate plan says exactly this. Thus the question is a political one, whether we like it or not. Perhaps the most significant feature of the corporate plan is that trade unionists are attempting to transcend the narrow economism which has characterised trade union activity in the past and extend our demands to the extent of questioning the products on which we work and the way in which we work upon them. The questioning of basic assumptions about what we should be producing and how it should be produced is the one that is likely to grow in momentum. And that summed up most of the aspects of the corporate plan. And mindful that we're working under the Architect RB heading, I'd like to read you the last paragraph of my 1980 signed version of Architect RB, which might be worth money someday. It says this: the alternatives are stark. Either we will have a future in which human beings are reduced to a sort of bee-like behaviour, reacting to the systems and equipment specified for them, or we'll have a future in which masses of people, conscious of their skills and abilities in both a political and technical sense, decide that they are going to be the architects of a new form of technological development, which will enhance human creativity and mean more freedom of choice and expression rather than less. The truth is, we shall have to make the profound political decision as to whether we intend to act as architects or behave like bees. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to pick up where Phil left off, and that's by focusing on what I think is a truly remarkable book, first published in 1980, written by Mike Cooley, not all in one go, but brought together by Mike in 1980 as a series of lectures and interventions and ideas that he'd been working on over time. In many ways, Architect RB prefigures a lot of the current debates that are being had on the left about work, about technology, and about what has recently, well, fairly recently been termed the impending fourth industrial revolution, and asking how we can respond to the challenges that such developments present. And I've been reading or rereading Mike's book alongside this book, which is titled Inventing the Future, which has a lot of things which correspond quite closely to what Mike wrote in Architect RB, and contains quite a lot of challenging ideas and challenging concepts for myself and for anybody, I guess, who's interested in the future of how we experience work. Not everything there I agree with. Not everything there I think corresponds to what we see around us, but it certainly picks up on many of the major themes in Mike's book. And Mike is still around. He's in his early 80s. He's very arthritic and therefore can't travel, but he still retains a lively mind, and we're hoping in the future Spokesman Books, the publishing imprint of the Russell Foundation, which published this, to produce more work, contemporary work by Mike Cooley and on his thoughts. But I'm going to begin with, I guess, picking up on the title of the book, Architect or Bee, and picking up its original source, or probably the source that Mike first picked it up from. And I'll start with a long quote, and this part of this quote is reproduced at the very start of the book. Labour is, in the first place, a process in which both people and nature participate, and in which people of their own accord start, regulate and control the material relations between themselves and nature. By thus acting on the external world and changing it, they at the same time change their own nature. They develop their slumbering powers and compel themselves to act in obedience to his sway. We presuppose labour in a form that stamps it as exclusively human. A spider conducts operations that resemble those of a weaver, and a bee puts to shame many an architect in the construction of her cells. But what distinguishes the worst architect from the best of bees is this: that the architect raises their structure in their imagination before they erect it in reality. At the end of every labour process, we get a result that existed in the imagination of the labourer at its commencement. They not only affect change of form in the material on which they work, but they also realise a purpose. And this is from Volume 1, Chapter 7 of Karl Marx's work, Capital. And what Marx is talking about here is the unity between people, the person carrying out labour, and the object or thing on which they're working. We put something of ourselves into what we work on. And part of Marx's critique, and it's something that's picked up by Mike, is that in the quest for greater profit, that unity is destroyed. We are torn away from that relationship. So it does so by breaking the labour process down into more and more simplified tasks, removing control of the work process from the worker. This process of separating the conception of what you're doing from the actual act of doing it has been documented, was seen by the workers in large industrial plants in the 1970s, and has worked its way at ever-growing rates into all of our working lives. And the politics of technology, the human price of technology, what I would say the human costs of the application to technology, to the work process, is really at the heart of Mike's work. You'll have noticed at the teaching, Mike got quite angry when he was recounting a list of times that had been decided for rest breaks. And this finds its way into Architect or B in the chapter titled The Changing Nature of Work. He writes, "For those of us who do not work in the automotive industry," he's touching on this particular plan in the auto industry, "it is difficult to appreciate how bad the situation has become and to what extent workers are even being paced by these computerized high technology systems. In the section where they press out car bodies in one car company, workers in 1973 were subject to an agreement on the makeup of their rest allowances. The elements are as follows. Trips to the lavatory, 1.62 minutes, is computer precise, as he said, not 1.6, not 1.7, but 1.62 minutes for your trip to the toilet. For fatigue, so you're feeling a bit tired, 1.3 minutes if you're lucky. Sitting down after standing for too long, and these are very long shifts on the labour-intensive, quite taxing production line, you get 65 seconds. For monotony, you're keeping pace with a mechanised production process, you're keeping up with a mechanical, repetitive process, you get 32 seconds for recuperation from that. And so the grotesque, and it really is grotesque, litany goes on. So to come up with these figures, Phil touched on the ideas of Taylorism. To come up with these figures, you would have had process engineers. You'd have had somebody highly skilled, university educated, exposed to culture, exposed to different circumstances with a stopwatch. That stopwatch and an incentive to eke profit out of human lives, disrupting that link between them working and their relationship with the workers that they're monitoring. This stopwatch, deciding, this piece of technology, changing the way they relate to work itself and to other human beings. And I think more and more and more we're seeing how a technology of surveillance, because that's in effect what that stopwatch was, deciding how long you got for the toilet, has found its way into many aspects of many people's working lives. From the call centre, where you have a flash on the screen telling you when you can go to the toilet, or a flash on the screen telling you if you've been on the telephone too long, to my profession, if you want to call it that, what I spend half of the working week doing, teaching, where my teaching and the monitoring of my teaching is mediated by a computer system, where I don't necessarily talk to a manager for months on end, but where they know exactly where I am in terms of meeting my targets, because they have a computer screen in front of them and they have a computer program, and they'll bring up my name and up will flash a bar graph with pluses and minuses, green and red, this mediation of technology. And more, computer technology is being brought into play and brought into the picture. And again, writing in 1980, Mike went on to do a lot of work on the implications and the social implications of artificial intelligence. I think it's something that we should think about quite a bit now, and some of the quite dreadful implications of introducing artificial intelligence. And he writes on page 42, a human being using total information processing capability to bring to bear synaptic connections of 10 to the power of 14. So that's 10 with 14 zeros after it. I would tell you how that corresponded to the number of atoms in the universe if I could remember. But the most complicated robotic device with pattern recognition capability, and this is 1980, has only about 10 to the power of 3 intelligence units. The actual computing power here is important. But the question is this: why do we deliberately design equipment to enhance 10 to the power of 3 machine intelligence, but to diminish the 10 to the power of 14 intellect? Why, when machines and these processes are they designed not to fully enhance and fully exploit or unleash the capabilities of the human mind? I'll skip a section because time is moving on. So there are powerful questions which remain to be asked, actually, and articulated in view of what is coming next, in view of the fact that we are now, well, I know how much further on, we're 36 years on from the publication of this book. I was born the year this was first published. The exponential leaps and growths in the application of technology and the development of technology have revolutionised, not necessarily in a positive way, although in some instances it has been positive, what is possible. Recent estimates of the percentage of jobs which could be possibly be subject to full automation is between 47 and 80%. So between 47 and 80% of all jobs could be replaced by machines, whether computer or robotic. The experience of work, or the changing experience of work, which has been generated by the application of these technologies, has led to a whole number of sentiments. And if you read The Guardian 2 days ago, you'd have seen some coverage of the authors of this book and the phenomena of the no jobs block, which will appear at the demonstration, the People's Assembly demonstration, which will happen on Saturday. So intense have these processes become that there are real questions. being put about the future of work, and some people drawing the conclusion that they simply do not want a job if it means having a job in these circumstances. I think there are issues with that particular question. I'm not particularly in favour of jobs or employment, if you want to put it that way, but I'm very much open to the possibilities of work. So there is much to discuss and much to think about in Mike's book, and if you haven't read the book, you most certainly should. Very, very briefly, if that wasn't provocative enough, I'm hoping this will provoke at least a discussion, and I think a necessary discussion, coming out of the whole idea of alternative plans, socially useful production, and workers' plans. And that is, we have a whole number of what remains of our manufacturing industries, which are about as far removed from being socially useful production processes as it's imaginable to be. And one of those is the industry which revolves around the production of nuclear weapons. There is a wide debate, not all of it particularly measured, I have to say, about the future of Trident renewal, and the amounts of money that will be spent on it, so on and so forth. I think the case against nuclear weapons is morally, economically and politically compelling, but set against the prospect of however many people being made redundant if we simply flick off the switch of Trident production. I think we need to have a discussion and have some thoughts about the implications for that. And my provocation would be, and it links to Tony's question, well, Francis O'Grady's question transmitted through Tony of, have we had a workers' plan or alternative plan that works? And I think the discussions around, if not Trident, then what? And then what simply cannot be mass unemployment or destruction of communities. If not Trident renewal, then what? Is one that we need to start to grapple with if we're to have a serious discussion about not renewing weapons which could destroy every human being on this planet.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Phil. One of the things I like about Nottingham Contemporary is that it encourages an informal intellectual community, which I think is very much in the spirit of the Institute for Workers' Control. It's self-organisation. The creative impulse, which was one of the things that Russell highlighted when he was trying to figure out why he was campaigning against the First World War, was locked up for it. He contrasted with the possessive impulse, which was the destructive one. The creative one was the one that could actually offer a different kind of opportunity. So with that in mind, I hope that there might be some creative impulses in response to the presentations you've had. Who would like to begin? Please. This is being recorded, I think.
I'll take one of these, it's okay. The reason we use this microphone is because we record these events so that people who can't be here in person can watch them on the internet. But having said that, if there's anyone who doesn't want their voice or what they say to be recorded, all you have to do is say into the microphone, "I don't want to be recorded," and then we turn the kind of equipment off. So I forgot to mention that at the beginning.
Thank you. So I was there. Yeah. Okay. I was just noticing Bill Mollison on the joint award, and I was just wondering whether permaculture had any impact on what you were doing, because I was looking at the first kind of note on a definition for a socially useful product, was that it doesn't actually waste energy or raw materials, and I was just wondering exactly what kind of, zeitgeisty thing was going on there that was shared within those kind of ideas, or whether there was any cross-pollination at all.
So, was the name Morrison, did you say?
Bill Mollison. Just
Oh, yes.
on your slide, yeah. So, what kind of credit is one of the creators of the concept of permaculture? And I was just wondering whether there was any cross-pollination there.
Yeah, that was the Right Livelihood Award that was given in Sweden to Mike Cooley, Bill Mollison, and a third person whose name I can't remember. And they were quite distinct, I think, in terms of they weren't linked. I mean, I think it was divided amongst three because they chose to. But did you have any reflections on that, Phil?
No. Actually, sorry.
On permaculture and no.
Sorry.
No.
I'm not a gardener.
No.
Sorry.
It's not about gardening.
Perhaps Ian can help us. Yes.
I think in the list of socially useful production, the sort of tenants, there is a very strong commitment to environmental sustainability.
Yes.
And I think permaculture sort of feeds into that in terms of a design approach. So it's not explicit, but it's implicit. And I think I thought that Mike's work was ahead of Bill Mollison. It's interesting that about the same time. Can I ask a question as well?
Of course, yeah.
All right, thanks. Because Tom talking about stopwatches and stuff, I did an engineering degree and ended up down the road at Plessey as the first robotics engineer in the Plessey company. So we had a machine called a Puma, Programmable Universal Machine for Automation, and that was designed around the dimensions of a human arm for General Motors to fit that description that I think Phil mentioned. The interesting thing there was that they wanted to check me out as the designer, programmer, systems engineer and general dog's body. So they got a man in with a stopwatch to time the robot to see whether the programmer, designer had done his job. And so I thought it was an interesting kind of linkage. I didn't get involved. I got involved with Kate's towards the end and saw the value of Mike's work through whatever route.
What's Kate's?
Kate's is the Centre for Alternative Industrial and Technological Systems, which followed on from the Lucas project. And I forgot what I was going to say now. But that was it. I graduated in 1980, worked at Westlands for a bit, and then came back to work for Plessey. And it was only about 10 years later that I realised that my job was a manufacturing systems engineering lecturer at Trent. Now, manufacturing systems engineering was the Lucas response to the Lucas Plan, which was entirely the opposite of what the Cooley Plan was. And it followed the brilliant description that Phil gave. So it took me a while, and that was my job title. It took me 10 years to realise that I was a complete, well, people realised I was a complete bastard anyway, but the environment in which I'd been asked to work was absolutely abominable. So it was really exciting to find that as a technologist, you could do something that was actually socially useful. It's really inspiring. It's a very important message that is actively excluded from the educational process. Now, I think I mentioned last week that I got involved in a debate that international conflict, this was the motion from all the engineering institutions in the United Kingdom in 1999. The debate motion was that international conflict is essential for technological development.
Wow.
Okay, now if you think about that for very long, that's a fascist doctrine, and that was a debate with 300 or 400 graduate engineers from mechanicals, electricals, production and whoever else, computing. We won the debate, but it's scary that that was ever put. And so the challenge now in reliving, and not least which is the position of the workers in nuclear, to regenerate that sense is an uphill struggle. But the biggest problem is the educational system has actually destroyed any sense of socially useful aspect in terms of what most technical scientific students actually experience. So what's the question? How do we change that?
Thank you. Just take a few more before we respond. Right.
I don't know if this is going to make any sense at all, but I'm always a bit wary about what I call wizzo ideas, where people sort of devise something which is divorced from the class struggle. It's a sort of like I think what Marx called utopian socialism, like Fourier and people like that. That's trying to be provocative, actually. And so I read several articles and I read parts of the book, and in fact I find it quite inspiring, all the thing about the role of humans in the whole societal process of producing stuff. And I thought that some of the interesting things which you mentioned were the fact that the Lucas management didn't like the idea, not because they'd sort of given it much thought. They probably thought, we're not having the workers coming in and telling us what to do. What sort of precedent is that? That's a collapse of society. And also, of course, the role of the TUC at the time, which was, well, it's outside procedures. I mean, of course, we hear that all the time because people sort of get set into certain procedures. I mean, you see it with Westminster as much as anything. I mean, the whole thing with Jeremy Corbyn at the moment is he's upsetting procedures. We've been going along like this for years. We've built up our whole lives around this, and here's this bearded twit coming along and just upsetting things. So I thought it was interesting towards the end when Mike said, that Lucas management were thinking of moving stuff. And I think that's when the crunch really comes. So I think it's a sort of walking on two legs type of thing, where you have a vision about what is socially useful production, at the same time as saying, they're not going to let us have it. We're going to have to really fight for this at the same time. And that applies particularly, say, to Trident, the whole issue of Trident. What do you do with all that incredible knowledge and expertise, but at the same time, how do you make it fit into a whole society?
Okay, and Oliver.
Sorry, I'll try to make this brief, but I suppose my question is, on a fundamental level, how does one persuade consumers that they have a stake in production, and that they themselves are producers? Because it's so difficult now, the mentality that we have, which is so consumerist and atomized and instilled in a sort of bourgeois consumerist culture. It seems to me very difficult to move to have that paradigm shift from people thinking themselves as consumers of products, of knowledge, of whatever, of goods and services, to being actually producers of goods and services. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Okay, and Ross wanted to.
Well, I've come along armed with my copy of Architectural B, which I bought in 1980, I think, at the Conference of Socialist Economists. And looking at it again, it's got a lot about the impact of computers. And indeed, Mike Cooley was an industrial designer, and computers were already beginning to de-skill the sort of work he did. And it's quite perceptive in seeing how it would alter the system of capitalist production, and more resources would go into inanimate things, machinery, materials, less and less into living labour, create a lot of unemployment. What he doesn't say, of course, is an awful lot of surplus value and profits were created out of this process, which there was nothing to do with in terms of real productive investment, so was being pushed around in money markets and brought about the financial crash of 2008. But what I do think is missing, and perhaps it would not be fair to scold him, having written this material 40 years ago, is to see the positive side of information technology. that yes, it's undermining capitalism, which is a damn good thing, not a moment too soon. It is also a force of production that lays the basis for a different sort of society, a socialist society, where we do, en masse, really control our lives. I mean, it was Marx who said that no social order disappears until new forces of production have arisen within it, which will bring about its end and lay the basis for a new one. So I'll end up, very commercially, by pushing my own little contribution, a little pamphlet, Computers, Capitalism and Socialism, which also points out the positive side that information technology can play. And I'm not talking about people walking along the street endlessly fiddling with their smartphones and walking in lampposts. Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. We'll take those four first, because that's quite a lot, and then we'll come...
Yeah. These are responses, not answers. I found your comment about the debate that international conflict was essential for technological progress very reminiscent of the argument I've heard so many times at these sort of meetings in the United States. They use the phrase spin-off, that we need military technology and the development to create the spin-off that improves our lives as ordinary citizens. A good friend of mine, Professor Lloyd J. Dumas, Jeff to his mates, who was the architect of a lot of the federal attempts at conversion legislation to give workers the statutory right to anticipate things like trident cancellation, had this response to that argument. And he gave the example of Corningware non-stick frying pans. And the non-stick coating on the non-stick frying pans was actually a spin-off. It was the same or a very similar material used to coat the nose cones of missiles to prevent them overheating. And he dismissed the argument simply by saying it would have been a whole lot cheaper to develop a non-stick frying pan without having to worry about the missile that went in it. Diffused that beautifully. And he then went on to make a more serious point, that if you compare, say, American research and development expenditure at the time, and it'll be the same now, compared to Japanese, because then, you know, in the 80s and 70s when I used to go there, they used to call Japanese products Jap crap. But now, the Japanese products, before China reached its ascendancy, were worrying them stupid. So Jeff pointed out, and is backed up by the US Bureau of Labour Statistics, that because Japan's expenditure on the military research and development was forbade almost after the end of the Second World War, they used their research and development expenditure to develop civilian products, consumer electronics, automobiles, which started to take the Western economies apart. Whereas there was the Americans depriving R&D fund, depriving the civilian economy of R&D funds, and hence they were lagging behind. But I think the non-stick frying pan, that resonates with people. On the second point, this again is a response rather than, it might be an answer, it may not be. But certain sections of the left, when we used to have these debates, would say that the Lucas Plan was revisionist and it attempted to modify capitalism rather than go out on the streets and burn everything down. Well, I have a little sympathy with the sentiment, but not perhaps the action. And we used to say to them, well, that's fine, you know, we all have a certain utopia vision that it may be different. But the challenge for us as senior shop stewards is that when redundancies were threatened, but we're all elected once a year, and if we don't do what the members like, you're out. forever, probably. What's easier to sell and act on when a redundancy is threatened? Because yours truly used to address the mass meetings standing on the centre spot at Turf Moor, Burnley Football Club, with 3,500 members there, and you had to get a majority, if not a unanimous vote. Proposal 1, we'll all go out and burn Burnley to the ground, or secondly, we think we can solve redundancies by the corporate plan. So that's not an answer, but that's a response to a question that came up fairly frequently.
Thank you, Phil.
I think Ivan's right to be, can everybody hear me? I use my teacher voice. I think Ivan's right to be suspicious of whizzo ideas and the idea that plans, I guess, come fully formed and automatically applicable and are there for all time and in perpetuity. I mean, that's one of the, when we talk about plans and planning, I think that's one aspect that we need to get our head around. I mean, one of the problems with doing that is that the idea of planning seems to have disappeared completely from, you know, the mind space of of anybody in any form of state or government power. You need only look at the responses to the threatened closure and the redundancies at Tata Steel. I'm not sure Mr. Javid has ever heard of an economic plan or an industrial plan. You know, I'm pretty sure when he was working in the City of London, the only planning they did on a day-to-day basis was how to maximise profit for that cycle of the market. So that's, you know, that is an important point. And, you know, the word utopianism or utopian was thrown at the Lucas Combine. You'd have had those discussions. And Mike deals with that question in his book. But the important aspect for me about what happened at Lucas and its applicability, I guess, is that this was an alternative plan produced by the workforce themselves. I mean, the town hall meeting in Padiham, that was, you know, a general all-round discussion about the plan, but there had been huge amounts of consultation, thousands, I'm betting, discussions until they got to the point where this plan was developed. I mean, I expect you spoke yourself hoarse and had to have a few pints to recover after most of these days. But that, you know, that's one of the most remarkable things, I think, about what happened at Lucas, is that you had a group of people who thought, we actually have the skills and knowledge and capacity to do this for ourselves when threatened with the worst of all possible situations. And I do wonder, kind of, you know, thinking about the state of trade unions and certain sections of the trade unions, how some sections would respond if they were simply told, come up with your own plan. You know, when Jeremy Corbyn came last year to, I'd forgotten this, but Tony reminded me, so I may have stolen one of your anecdotes, came to Nottingham last year, he spoke about, or mentioned briefly, his time when he was an organiser for the AEU in the motor industry. Just the other day I got, somebody emailed me a scan of a letter he'd written on behalf of the IWC, inviting people to the Institute for Workers' Control, inviting people to a conference for car workers. But he said when they went to see Tony Benn, who was at the time in the Department for Industry, you know, they were expecting to go and be told, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, this is what... And Ben turned around and said, well, what do you suggest? You know, the tables were turned in that respect, and it was, you know, an opening for real creativity on their part. I think we need to revive some of that, not just in terms of preserving jobs and employment, but if we think about stopping the slide into environmental destruction, for instance, and other aspects of work. In terms of computers, I mean, I think Ross is right in some aspects. I mean, if you look at the role of computer technology, for instance, in Chile, when Allende attempted to have a national plan for the economy, you know, there huge amounts of money were invested in computer programming and using those systems to monitor production. And, you know, Mike is very critical of the way in which capitalist enterprise, if you want to give it that term, uses or began to use information technology as a monitoring and a de-skilling process. But he went on to spend quite a lot of the 80s working around the ideas associated with the journal which he set up, Artificial Intelligence and Social and Society, yeah. There was a journal called Artificial Intelligence and Society where he attempted to relate the lessons of socially useful production from Lucas to that developing industry. But, you know, if you ask a lot of people in the public sector what they think of the computer systems they have to use, I don't think they feel liberated by them, actually. I think they are a burden, and they are an enormous burden and monitoring effort which prevent us from doing our jobs, by and large.
Thank you. There was somebody there that wanted to... Well, I was getting very nostalgic when you talked about stopwatches and clipboards, because I can remember being followed around, you know, in a factory in the 60s by somebody with a clipboard. But I also had a T&G steward behind me saying, slow down, waste that, slow down, waste that. All that scientific management at that time was continually undermined by rank and file stewards and things anyway. When they knew what was going on. And it was only about 6 years later when Volvo threw out all that scientific management and went back to team working in their factories and found it much more productive. Your comments about the use of technology, I think in a way, that kind of, all those bureaucratic specialisms, actually technology is breaking that down. You said you yourself, you were set with targets. How you get to those targets is more and more being left up to you, perhaps. I think the production process that you're involved in is absolutely crucial to the possibilities for workers' control of it. If you're in public transport on the buses, you don't need managers, you just need timetabling. If you're in the print like we were, managers wouldn't come on the shop floor. You know, the whole process was there in front of you. So, you know, the idea that we're all being driven down into jobs are still being broken down and down and down and down, and we're losing kind of resistance and control over that. I think it's probably a bit too pessimistic. You know, it's just a comment, not a question.
No, that's fine. Just a comment and also a question. We are a different generation, but there is a generation who are under 40 who have been brought up in a completely different value system, and they don't see the things in the way that we see them. I was a print worker. One thing that everybody seems to forget is the workers also had tremendous satisfaction. As a print worker, I remember, like Andrew said, that it's not the managers or anything, it's the workers who produced the things, who printed it. And when it came out, we did actually have tremendous self-satisfaction. We were not bothered about the employer or anything, more than anything else. That gave us some tremendous self-satisfaction. And the introduction, and I remember when it was Eddie Shah and then Murdoch, one of the things that they said was that it's a union that doesn't allow us to introduce computers. If it is introduced, we can sell the papers half the price. Now you know what the reality is. So my question is, at the end of the day, development for whose benefit? Because it's a Sputnik from Soviet Union that brought about a hell of a lot of computer development in the world, I think, without a shadow of doubt. The Americans got so excited about the whole thing, and there was more and more research going into it. What's the point of development? For whose benefit? At the moment, the way I see it is development for multinationals. They are the people who benefit from it, not the people. And it's something that you have to address it at some point, whether we like it or not. If the computer development and artificial intelligence is coming, then it's time that people who are responsible also address the question, what is it about the people who are going to be unemployed and people who will not be able to work anyway? Yeah. What is their situation?
Okay, thank you. There's just two more there, and that's I think we have time for. Louise, and then the lady.
Okay, thank you. My name's Louise. I didn't know anything about this until I came tonight, so I found it really interesting. So thank you to everybody that contributed. I suppose just a couple of thoughts really. I mean, it was really interesting listening to the contribution about what they were told, that these things were not useful and therefore it wasn't a good thing to do. And I was sort of thinking when you said about the heaters, and you know, lots of old people still die today because of the cold every winter. And so 40 years ago, there was a plan that would have produced something that was socially useful. And a group of people who were in control of that industry at that time said, oh, it's not useful and therefore we won't do it. But, you know, clearly we still need it now. So we needed it 40 years ago, but we still need it now because we're still in a position where we have that. And then the other thing that I sort of thought about was stuff Tom said about education, because I'm a teacher. And I remember a few years ago there was a quote from some minister about how we needed to make sure we educated people to know their place in society, really. And I think that is what we do. There's much more pressure now in schools to educate children and young people to know their place in society, so they just become bees, really, as you talked about. So they become workers in a system and aren't educated about these sorts of things. And that's one of the things that makes me sad in schools, that we're now so prescripted in what we do that we never talk about things like this. It would be really interesting for children to hear what you've all said tonight about the industry then and what people propose, but nobody ever invites people into schools to talk about those sorts of things. So I suppose that's and the final thing really, I suppose, about Trident, because that's always, I'm quite involved in union work, and the issue that comes up from some unions a lot is about, if we get rid of Trident, there's a whole raft of people that will lose jobs, and the impact on communities. And I teach in an old mining community. I've seen the impact of the removal of the mining industry on that community. So we're now into a sort of third generation of people who haven't worked, who have very poor lives, who have very little to look forward to, really. So I think we have to think about, because I'm completely opposed to Trident, but we have to make sure we have arguments about what we do for those communities and those workers along the lines of what you talked about. So I suppose really my question is, what more can we do to educate young people to know that we can have a different society, and a fairer and more equal society, and how do we change it? Because at the moment we do lots of work as a union to try and change our education system, but they don't listen to teachers because they're not interested in what we've got to say. So we need people outside of education to join with us and argue against a government that's, intent on destroying our education system.
Thank you. And the last one.
I'm particularly interested in the comment that was made about, international conflict is essential for economic development. Partly because when you look at, there's some interesting work on catastrophe theory, which you examine the likelihood, like a 1 in 1,000 year event, or the severity of the event, even if it's a 1 in 1,000 year probability, if it were to happen, it is the most disastrous thing you can think of. There are actually 2 threats to life on this planet. One is the threat from climate change, which is from man-made pollution, and the other is a threat from nuclear weapons. And I have to say that the threat from nuclear weapons is a very imminent one that people have been disregarding, because the detonation of even a small amount of the nuclear warheads that we have means actually the destruction of the planet as well. So those are the 2 most threatening things that face the planet. But it seems to be very difficult to turn that into an understanding of the value of the work that people do, and them having some role in being able to say whether that is moral work, or whether they would be better off working for things that actually are not going to threaten their own futures, the futures of their children and their grandchildren. One of the comments is just about the general title about architect or bee. One of the things that has always struck me about bees and an awful lot of other insect animals is that they cooperatively work together for the benefit and the survival of their own species. I would, in that case, value the bee rather higher than this title would give it. Because if we gave more of our time and effort to understanding our social relationships and to conflict resolution, preferably in a peaceful manner with some justice to it, we might all get further on. And I would like to move the sort of debate that goes around, particularly on redundancies and the nature of the work that people are doing, more towards looking at how we make for altogether a socially acceptable society that recognises our own and other people's humanity.
Thank you. That's. I'm pro-bee myself, and I think in a way the longer quote, the bit that Tom didn't read, was about alienation, and actually the bees are not alienated. I mean, and if you look at that little picture, it says indigenous architecture. I think you could also say ingenious architecture, actually. But I think that's a very positive note on which to get very close to an end, unless you want to respond.
I'll pretend it's a mass meeting. Not to any particular contributor, but what's just been said in the last 10 minutes triggers a few thoughts off in my head. First of all, if there were no jobs issue around the cancellation of Trident, would we think it would be more likely to be cancelled or less likely? I would think it would be much more likely to be cancelled. If you look at the whole history of this debate, and particularly in the United States, it is always the jobs card which is played to sustain current weapons production and extra ones. In fact, one congressman who was supporting the conversion legislation said to me, the way they get new projects through from a corporation level is make sure as many bits of the weapons system are manufactured in as many states as possible. So what the peace movement there has been trying to do for a long, long time, and where we've been trying to help them with the Lucas Plan example, is the sooner you can get jobs out of the disarmament debate, the better. But it's a long, slow process. On one of the lecture tours I did in the States in the early 80s, there were a gang of us from Europe went over, and I rang up two of the stewards in the plant in Barrow and asked them if they would come. Now, the people in Barrow have been exposed to this for quite a long time, 20, 30 years, but unfortunately, such is the nature of Barrow and the production facility, no one can argue that that can be changed or converted overnight. I mentioned earlier that there's a long history of attempts at conversion legislation in the States at federal and state level, and that would basically give workers in defence facilities the right, funded by the state and funded by at federal level, to sit down and prepare Lucas-style contingency plans. That's consistently failed at federal level, but with smaller majorities against each time. However, some of the legislation has actually gone through in states like Minnesota, I think Pennsylvania, and one or two others. Jeremy Corbyn spoke just before we did some filming for Steve Sprung's film last year. He spoke in Coventry and talked about the creation of a national arms conversion unit to facilitate the process. And I wrote an article for Hilary Wainwright's Red Pepper that actually laid out the history of conversion, and the message was, if that ever comes to pass, don't start from the beginning, because there's 20 years worth of experience there. And in fact, we had a local authority conference on setting up a national arms conversion unit in 1985 in Sheffield that would be local authority based. I think I'll stop there because the time's moving on. But I think the general message is, when this gets to further up the agenda, we are not starting from square one. Very quick last point. We were having a joke earlier. This is the first time I've been in this sort of meeting for years. And our colleagues were saying, well, what do you do now? I said, you really want to know? And I said, my wife Kate is craft instructor on cruise ships, and I'm her glamorous assistant. And we spend our time teaching craft on ships. The point being, if you could see me now, if my friends could see me now. But we had dinner, we shared a table with a retired commander of a nuclear submarine for a week. And it was fascinating, because when I really got to know him, I said, what about the renewal of the nuclear deterrent? And I remember his words, you do too, Kate, very clearly. He said, you will not find a commander of a nuclear or non-nuclear submarine in the fleet that believes that there is a case any longer for a nuclear deterrent. I rest my case.
Thank you very much. Tom's going to defer his further comments until the 19th of May when we meet again. Thank you very much for your attention.